begin this morning by stating the obvious. I am not Deacon Keith Strom, who was scheduled to give this homily. So you may be wondering what happened to said deacon from Chicago. Well, it had something to do with the snowstorm. He left Chicago on Friday morning, arrived at Pearson International Airport, and put it this way, he had ample time to explore every corner of that airport. He boarded a plane, I think around 7 p.m. Friday night, and got off the plane at 3 a.m. at Pearson International Airport. He was 7 hours on the plane. The plane actually taxied out and got stuck in the snow. One of the engines got so filled up with snow that it shorted out and all the power went out on the plane. Anyway, it was, and then by the time he get back on ground, there were no hotel rooms. So everyone say, "Ah," because it was really bad. So he got in late last night. So the poor man was shattered. So, I mean, if I was him, and I've been in similar circumstances traveling to speak, I mean, I'd probably have not only thought about canceling the mission, I'd be thinking about leaving the priesthood. So I hope he's still sleeping. So he was absolutely exhausted. So there's no way. So you're stuck with me this weekend, a last-minute thrown-together homily. Please lower your expectations. I want to invite you to think about something. I want you to think about a time in your life when you experienced incredible hospitality. You received incredible hospitality. Got it? Now I want you to think about a time, at least you believe you did, when you extended incredible hospitality to someone else. Give you a few seconds. Those of you online too, think about it. Now, I'm sure there are many incredible stories to be told, but I bet that not a few of these stories would include a meal, perhaps sitting around a table, and even a family. This week we are in the second week of Lent, but it's also the second week of our 5-week preaching series called On Purpose, in which we are examining the theme of hospitality, are called to be a church of hospitality, not just welcoming people into a building on Sunday mornings, as important as that is, but a church that welcomes people into every aspect of the life of our parish. A church that facilitates people being welcomed into the life of God. Last weekend, we laid a foundation, and we made a proposition that our God is a God of hospitality. God is an hospitable God, and that hospitality was symbolized by the image of the Garden of Eden. We looked at that story last week, and how God is trustworthy. God desires that we have life, and God wants to call all people to experience this life through Jesus. This week, we reflect a bit on our own role in making that happen. We're given the story of Abraham in the first reading, a part of the story of Abraham. In fact, properly speaking, at this point, it's the story of Abram, because he hasn't had a name change yet. Abram, or Avram in Hebrew, the word means father. It means exalted father. That's a pretty half-decent name, isn't it? Exalted father. It's a good name. And how at the age of 100 years, no, I figure they must have had a different way of counting years back then. What do you think? At the age of 100, God asked him to leave his family his kin, his home, and travel to a distant land and make a new home. He called him to go on a journey, leaving his life behind. And that would be difficult for most people at any stage of life, but I think sometimes, and this is not absolutely true, but it's generally true that the older we get, we kind of get stuck in our ways, don't we? Do you agree with that? And so, whatever age he was in our years, he was old. In fact, the letter to the Hebrews says that Abraham was so old, he was as good as dead. Have you ever felt that old? I do sometime in the morning when I get up. When you're so old that your back goes out and you stay home, that kind of old. So Abraham was old, and yet he said yes. He said yes to leave a literal comfort zone, to leave what was familiar, because he believed that God was calling him to something greater. And through that act of faith, that act of obedience, he has his name changed from Abram, exalted father, to Abraham, which means father of the nations, or father of a multitude. Something much greater and vast than he ever could have imagined. In our gospel today, we hear the story of the transfiguration. That's a fancy word to describe what happened on the mountaintop. It's a story that's in the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and we always hear this story on the second Sunday of Lent. Jesus selects his closest friends, Peter, James, and John, to go up the mountain, and they have this mystical experience. They have this vision of Jesus during which his divinity, his divine nature, shines through his humanity. And it's a very overwhelming experience. Peter says, hey, this is incredible. Let's build 3 tents, one for you, Lord, one for Moses and Elijah. Let's stay on the mountain. And then they hear the voice of God, and Jesus tells them not to be afraid, and they go down the mountain. So what's going on here? Well, I think the key is found, if you look at this passage in Matthew's Gospel, it's Matthew chapter 17. And although the words were not included in the lectionary, Matthew chapter 17 begins with these words, 6 days later. 6 days later, Jesus chose Peter, James, and John to go up the mountain. Well, what happened 6 days before? Well, you have to go to chapter 16. And for Catholics, Matthew chapter 16 is a very important chapter. Every Catholic should know Matthew chapter 16. In fact, Matthew chapter 16, verse 16. 16:16. Everyone say that 3 times really quickly. Only kidding. 16:16. It's the famous passage where Jesus says, you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. You are rock. It was Rocky 1. His name was Simon. It wasn't Peter. Just like Abram went to Abraham, Simon gets his name changed to Peter. Because Peter has made a profession of faith in Jesus. You're the Messiah. But with that, Peter has a particular understanding of what the Messiah is going to be. But Jesus affirms Peter. He says, I'll give you the keys of the kingdom. Whatever you open will be open on earth, will be opened in heaven. Like, that's why the successor of Peter, the Pope, the symbol is the key. Matthew 16:16. But then, this is what happens literally immediately after this crowning moment. Jesus, for the first time, tells his disciples what's going to happen in Jerusalem. For the first time. Now remember, they've been on a roller coaster ride with this long-haired construction worker from Nazareth, from the boondocks. They've been doing miracles. They're on the front cover of Time magazine. The paparazzi are all over them. It's been an incredible journey. And Peter has this understanding, this earthly understanding of what the Messiah will be. Peter Peter was just appointed the prime minister. It's going to be incredible. And then Jesus says these words. We hear this. From that time on, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed. And Peter's like, what? He's got a serious case of whiplash here. His ideas of what lies ahead have just disintegrated. And we hear in the text that Peter, he's now the prime minister. He takes Jesus aside and said, Lord, you're mistaken. This cannot happen. And that's where Jesus famously turns to Peter and says, get behind me, Satan, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. And then we hear, 6 days later, they went up the mountain. You see, so these stories are connected. Peter wants to control the narrative. He wants God's purpose to fit within his purpose. And when he's up on the mountain and they have this mystical experience, Peter is like, okay, forget Jerusalem. Let's just stay here. This is cool. This is great. And Jesus is like, no. We have to go down the mountain. We have to continue the journey towards Jerusalem because guess what, Peter? This is not about you. There is a higher purpose. And when we talk about the theme of hospitality, the starting point of hospitality, we already know this. When we offer hospitality, we know that to be a good host, your starting point is, it's not about us, right? It's about the guest. Or when we receive amazing hospitality, it's amazing because our hosts have had as their starting point, it's not about them. There's a higher purpose that we are called to serve. And for us, as the Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe, with our vision to be the heart of Dartmouth, to impact this city, it's not about us. All that we have received, all that we have, it's not about us. God is calling us to let go, to leave our comfort zones, to let go of natural consolation and comfort, just like Abraham did. See, what Abram left was very natural. He left family, he left land, he left property, these natural elements. But Peter was called to leave supernatural comfort for the sake of a higher purpose, for the sake of a mission. Our call as a church is to be a church that reflects the hospitality of God, a church that reflects the heart of God. Because guess what? As we said, hospitality isn't just about welcoming people into this building. It's about welcoming and facilitating people entering into the very life of God within the community of the church, with everything that means. We are called, every one of us, to be agents of that kind of hospitality. But here's the thing. You can't give what you don't have. How can we invite others to enter in if we have not yet fully entered in ourselves? That's why we're having a Lenten mission, so that we can dip our hearts into the life and love of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, so that we can be reminded of the incredible riches and richness that God desires to offer to each and every single one of us. That there is more. However much we think we may know about God, or how much we think we may know God personally, because there's a difference, right, between knowing about God and knowing God. There's always more. We can go deeper. And this time of retreat is a time to be immersed and renewed in God's love and God's grace. And so tonight, The first night of the mission, it starts at 7 o'clock, goes from 7 to 8:30. There'll be some music. There'll be a talk by Deacon Keith, and he's a really good presenter. And then there'll be a time of prayer, and we'll wrap up by 8:30. And the theme tonight is discovering the Father's desire for us. The Father's desire for us. Tomorrow night, we're going to look at the theme of allowing the Father's love in Jesus to transform us so that we can grow as a family of God. And on Tuesday night, we're going to look at sharing that life with others. I believe that God has something for each and every single one of us. And I do hope to see you there. Would love to see you there for all 3 nights. If you can only make 2 nights, come out for 2 nights. If you can only make 1 night, come out for 1 night. But let's come with expectant faith and ready to be reminded that it's not about us.